chewing tobacco for the day.
All right, I heard about this in Deka's class.
Yeah.
How they just started as new product was introduced into their culture, they found new methods for storage, and they became art.
Yeah.
Like snuff. Is that tobacco or snuff?
Chewing tobacco.
Chewing tobacco. Okay. Oh my gosh.
In early 60s here in Square Banks, you could go into the tourist shops, and there would be some of these quid boxes, different things, birds, fish, seal in this case. Yeah. And I thought, like, they're always there. I can always go in and pick up a few,
And then they're not.
I went out to school. I got back in '69 and never saw them again. And I think the old man who made them and used them hit the end of their lifespan, and then nobody was making them.
Yeah. I had not seen these in our books yet. I had seen other little things. Yeah. That's a really beautiful book. Susan Fair's book.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
I haven't really spent any time.
I have a couple photographs in that book, but
yeah, I know she passed away, and like Angie and Angela and a bunch of people here from the university.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we're gonna get this thing published, and
oh yeah.
I know the university press did the printing of it. So I thought it was a really good overall book for someone who hasn't had any education about our native people of Alaska. I was kind of ashamed and actually shocked afterwards at my lack of knowledge and my misinformation. It's just, you don't think about well, being Native American, I'm kind of sensitive to our native peoples, but wow,
that's a silver salmon buckle.
that is gorgeous. Wow.
Yeah, these.
Look at how smooth that is. It looks very sturdy. This is not going to come off.
Yeah.
Did you wear it for a while?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wore it once in a while just because it was appropriate for something.
Yeah. Very well made.
Look at this baby.
What is it?
It's a jade axe.
Seriously?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Heavy. Take care of it.
I will. Oh my goodness. Wow.
I spent time on St. Lawrence Island with these old Siberian pipe makers.
Oh.
Siberian pipes. Albert Kalawi was a pipe maker. Well, there were two pipe makers left on St. Lawrence in 70, maybe 72. I was out there. In Gamble was Lincoln Blassie. In Savunga was Albert Kalawi. And so I spent some time in both places, but I spent pipe making time with Albert. He was an old man, and he was born on the Siberian coast. He was familiar with the pipes from his childhood, where men would smoke these pipes. Very small bowl.
It is a small bowl.
And what they would do is to make a filter so you wouldn't inhale the tobacco, they would poke some reindeer hair down in the bottom with a little ivory pick.
All right.
And compact it, and then they'd pack the tobacco on the top. He said the old guys, tobacco was costly. They would find rotten driftwood and powder it, mix it with their little tobacco, pack this thing. And he said, the man would get up in the morning, wake up, and get out of, instead of getting out of his sleeping robe, he'd reach out and get his pipe, and then he'd pack it, and then he'd light it and burn it out in one inhalation. Just exhale as far as possible, inhale, and burn the thing to the bottom, and then he'd see stars and stripes, and then he would flop back for a moment until the stars and stripes went away, and then he'd get up and face the day.
Mhm.
But Albert was an old time. He was born on the Siberian coast.
Okay.
The change came in 1948 when the Soviets really started to crack down on movement. Like the Cold War
Mhm.
shut down on movement. Up to that time, people could head to the Siberian side part of the summer, come back to St. Lawrence for the winter. So the Cold War interceded. It drew a hard line. And then in the early days of the Cold War, the Soviet side transmitted radio to the people on St. Lawrence in their own language, Siberian Yupik, tell them what absolute nasties the Americans were and how life was so great on the Soviet side.
Mhm.
I mean, the people were, of course, aware of propaganda,
Mhm.
and they recognized it as propaganda. But they lived with it for quite a while. But
Yeah.
the border was part of the Cold War.
Mhm.
Early 50s, Navy PBY electronics surveillance plane was flying just north of St. Lawrence Island,
Mhm.
within sight of the village, and MiGs came out from Siberia and shot it down. And
Oh my
one of my
gosh.
old friends
Yeah.
he was from Gamble,
Yeah.
and he was there. He saw the MiGs hit it with whatever, and when it went down, it was springtime. He had his umiak ready to go on the beach.
Mhm.
Another man had his umiak. They yelled for some crew, launched their boats, and went and picked up the crew of the PBY
All right.
in the 50s. And then he said, then he was contacted by military, and they flew him to Washington, D.C. to receive an award from Eisenhower
Oh
for
my
his
gosh.
heroics.
Yeah.
And
And that's the history I've not heard, and it's so
Yeah.
exciting to hear it.
yeah.
I had no idea it affected the
Yeah.
peoples here so much.
Yeah, but it was Cold War.
Yeah.
People took it very seriously.
Mhm.
There was a radar station on St. Lawrence, East Cape, I think it was. It was a military installation, and of course the Soviets tried to dork with it as much as they could. So I drank beer with the Gamble men one time, young guys, and they said, "Well, are you American?" I said, "Well, I'm Canadian." They said, same thing. Well, we'll tell you. We're going to tell you this. We're not supposed to tell anybody. They said once one of our men from the village was traveling down the island, and he spotted a person on the land. He was dressed in black. It wasn't one of the local people.
Yeah.
There was no boat visible. Who the hell is this person?
Sure.
So he said they came back to the village. They reported to every village had this National Guard group that he had spotted this person down there.
Mhm.
So they called Nome. Nome was the National Guard headquarters. They sent out a G2 armed intelligence officer with a helicopter, and they put down in Gamble when they got National Guard guys there. It was in the 50s. They were shooting M14s, as .308 caliber. And he said they flew down the island. They got close to the area. They landed. They walked forward, and this man started to run down from higher ground on the island. They ran forward to try to cut him off from hitting the beach. They weren't going to make it and get there ahead of him.
Sure.
So he said the G2 officer slapped him on the shoulder. He said, "Shoot him." So he said he dropped down. He got his M14 up, got hit the beach, and started running level. Got out in front of him, hit him with a burst of .308 caliber M14. He said he knocked the guy down dead. And they went over. They searched him. He had no ID of any kind. Everything was blank. And he looked Asian. they assumed he must have had a submarine offshore
Yeah.
waiting to pick him up,
Yeah.
running through the water wearing a wetsuit.
Mhm.
And so they bagged him and loaded him on a helicopter, and he said, G2 said, "You're military, you're National Guard. This incident never happened. You weren't here, you didn't see this. You keep your mouth shut, you don't tell anybody." And that's what they did. But then I got to drinking beer with these boys,
Yeah.
and they told me the story that
Yeah.
they'd actually shot this guy down and killed him. He was probably a Soviet infiltrator planning electronics or some such, you know.
Yeah.
But that happened. There
That
were
is,
confrontations.
and this is something that I've only witnessed on a TV show as
Yeah.
as an idea of
Yeah.
something that happened, but it
Yeah.
really did.
Yeah, it stayed. There were other contexts. Barrow was funny, and the Soviet sub came in off Barrow with the shore ice was a couple miles or whatever it was,
All right.
and 8 of their crew members got off and got up onto the ice. They were taking photographs of each other. One of the hunters out of Barrow spotted them and said, "What the hell is this? There's 8 guys here. There's a submarine." You know, so he went back into Barrow and said, "Hey, this is this is here." So they immediately got National Guard guys together, snow machines. They went out, cut these Soviets off from the submarine, and they circled them with it. And then they arrested them and took them back into town. And then eventually they flew them out, you know, to military destination, and eventually they were released, and they went back to the Soviet Union.
Oh, okay.
But they were rounded up by the National Guard in Barrow.
I bet they weren't expecting
They were
that.
being tourists, you know. Gee, we're in America, we're in Alaska. Here we are, we're standing on the ice, and there's America over there. And suddenly, they're cut off from the submarine.
Oh, whoops.
And you know, put your hands up and let's go.
So they were like temporarily POWs then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, they're political
Yeah.
prisoners.
Yeah.
It was Cold War era. You didn't dork around.
How long do you think they stayed in
I doubt
on
that
our
they were
side?
very long.
Oh, okay.
They're just sailors, you know. They
Oh,
have any particular
okay. They weren't on a
great
mission.
wisdom about anything.
Yeah,
Of course,
that's pretty exciting.
the USS had some tentacles out. There were sound sensors to pick up Soviet submarines in different places,
Right.
so that military intelligence was plotting the all the submarines, their movement when they left port. My brother was a helicopter pilot. He worked on that stuff, planting sound sensors
Yeah.
to get information on where the Soviet submarines were sneaking into the Arctic to go under the ice and so on. There are not too many channels into the high Arctic. If you go to Wales, there's a little green shack there, and then there's a cable about this big around. It comes and goes into the ocean. The sound sensors out there in the Bering Straits,
Those are like the ones they had in the San Francisco Bay.
probably.
Yes.
Yeah. It's all, you know.
They
it's-
had shacks and the guys were there and yeah.
It's
it was-
all at this stage,
yeah.
you know, it's half-century old technology.
Sure.
But they just do it. They do it, but they do it.
I had no idea they had that kind of technology back then.
Oh yeah. Military reached out with this cutting edge of technology. My brother flew in the Canadian Arctic. He had the first GPS system ever used in Canada.
What was
It's
the
a
year?
big bulky thing. Oh, I don't remember now. Early '60s maybe.
Okay.
But
So
he said
way back.
He was working with the military, and they needed exact locations,
Wow.
and they brought this equipment in, stuck it in the back seat of his helicopter, and he was flying with GPS before anybody else in Canada
That's
had
crazy.
GPS.
I had no idea.
But that
Pretty
doesn't have much to
exciting.
do with native art, does it?
No, but I mean it's still very exciting. I
Yeah.
don't know any of that stuff.
Yeah, I went up to St. Lawrence in the early '60s, '63 maybe. I was here in Squarebanks, and you know, sleepy old Squarebanks. my wife was working for Wien as a stewardess, so I
my
could get the
gosh.
free tickets,
Yeah.
no cost.
Mhm.
So, so I looked at, well, where can I go? Jesus, the north end of St. Lawrence Island. Nobody goes there.
Mhm.
So I got on the Wien flight,
Mhm.
and I went to Gamble,
Mhm.
middle of the winter, hopped off. And there's nobody there, just the local people,
Mhm.
little village. I said, who are you? I said, hey, it's me. My wife is a Wien stewardess, and I can get out here and visit you folks. I said, oh, Jesus, your wife is our stewardess. You can stay with us. So I had that great opportunity
Mhm.
to stay locally and go out with the hunters. We went out on the sea ice hunting seals in a Umiak skin boat.
Who gets
And it
to
was
do
the
that?
last
Yeah.
ivory-shod Umiak in Alaska. The keel of an Umiak is like a sled runner. It projects down,
Mhm.
and you can get the standard crew on St. Lawrence is 8 men. You get 4 to a side, and you can run it over the ice, push it like like a sled with one runner.
Mhm.
So this particular Umiak it had an ivory-shod keel. The keel was sheathed in walrus ivory, and had a dog team. We could hook the dog team up and have them pull. We had an engine well with an outboard. We could run an outboard in it, and we head out onto the sea ice in dead of winter. And open leads would put off steam because the weather, air's so cold.
Mhm.
Any exposure to the water would steam up. So you could look 2 miles that way and see a plume of steam. That's open water. We'd head for the open water to shoot seals with the doggies pulling and the guys pushing, and so that was obviously the last ivory-shod Umiak in Alaska, and that's it's the tusks are not so large that you can't. All you can get is a piece like
I was
this.
gonna ask, did they just do segments?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's all pieced
And
up.
how were they attached?
Well, in the old days, they obviously just pinned them on,
Mhm.
but now they would probably use screws.
Mhm.
And the replacement for that would be ABS, plastic.
Mhm.
They could squash it down and screw it onto
Sure.
the keel, and it was a great runner, very
Mhm.
strong. So ivory was replaced with ABS plastics.
Mhm.
The St. Lawrence people relate the crew of an Umiak to a pod of killer whales, and they say 8 is a common number for whales in a pod of killer whales, and 8 is the standard crew for Umiak. And so some terms were interchangeable where they were seen as comparable. The pod of killer whales.
Mhm.
If you approached the killer whales properly, they would share their food with you. They'd leave you a piece of their walrus or their whale that they'd killed,
Mhm.
sharing with the people pod. Also, they believed that the killer whales could come onto the island at night and be people, be a person.
Mhm.
So you meet this mysterious person walking at night, and he's actually a killer whale who's become a man for a period of time, and he's mysterious, but he's there. He's a killer whale that's mutated into one of the local people.
Is this what you see a lot of in the art, the transformation in some of the masks, in some of the artwork?
Yeah.
There's human and animals in one
Right,
piece
right.
of work.
For Athabascan people, they see their stories of mythology draws animals and people very closely together. There was an ancient time when animals and people were not differentiated. They spoke the same language.
Mhm.
And then there came a time when they're separated. But the animals retain the ability to understand human language, so that old Athabascan people would use indirect speech. Like a Koyukon man wanted to go moose hunting, he wouldn't say, I'm going moose hunting, I'm going up the river, or no, I'm going to such and such. He would say, I'm going to run up the river and have a look around, spend a couple days. That's his announcement that he's going moose hunting. He wouldn't say he's going moose hunting, because the moose might overhear him, figure out his plan, and stay away from him. So that indirect speech, because it's a carryover from the knowledge of early archaic time, when people and animals were not differentiated. They spoke a common language. Even in my family, I got sort of the tail end of that, like, hunting moose, you don't, talking, I'd say, geez, don't talk and talk. Moose hate people talking, hate the sound of human speech. But, it's the carryover.
Sure.
They understand you, and you're tipping them off if you say too much. You have to keep your mouth shut.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think she's here.
Is she? Yeah, from what we were learning in class is like the spirituality aspect of it, like the masks, and they represent seeing into the other side of things. On the other side, when you pass, like there's this thin veil between the heavens and our earthly life, and
People, native people believed in reincarnation.
oh, okay.
People,
Okay.
a baby died, they could return to, or even an adult died, if they were a respected person, their spirit, if you get into coastal country like all along the north coast, a woman with a child would invite the spirit of somebody who passed away to come to her child and help her child. So there was a personal spirit, and then there was a name spirit. The name spirit was a respected person who had died, and that spirit would come to the child and guide the child until they were coming out of childhood, maybe 12, 14, and then that spirit would be less visible or less prominent, and the child's personal spirit would take over. So if you read stuff from early contact with coastal people, people say, well, they loved their children so much they didn't discipline their children, and the children had quite a lot of freedom. The explanation for that is, while their child is young, to discipline them would be to discipline their name spirit. You don't want to insult their name spirit and perhaps drive it away through harsh discipline. So the children got a ride for the first, say, 14 years of their life, say, and then their name spirit becomes less prominent, and their individual personal spirit is thought to be there, and then children can be disciplined because you're not injuring their name spirit, who might be insulted by having a child disciplined. So that's one of those interesting details where writing will say, oh, they loved their children so much they didn't discipline. They were actually afraid to discipline their children. The name spirit might crack down on them.
I had seen the cultural differences and had heard people comment on exactly what you're talking about, that they didn't discipline the kids, and now this makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. The Athabascan people believed that the dead were reincarnated and came back, life cycled. And, my great-grandfather was a very respected individual, and his name is among us now, has come down to other people who passed that name along, thinking they would have some of the attributes of my great-grandfather. One of my nieces is married to a guy who has my great-grandfather's name. And, when people took on Western-style names where they had a personal name and then a family name, they often took on a name from somebody they respected, somebody who was a strong individual, like a riverboat captain, a trader who was a respected trader, and so on. So then they would gain some of the attributes of that person by having the name attached.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, the Chandelar-Quichin, they're off the Porcupine River up to Chandelar to Arctic Village. Their belief in reincarnation was that, yes, the spirit of the child returned in a newborn child, but in the opposite sex and a different family.
Okay.
So, there's little permutations of all these things that, so there's some basic concepts, but then there are different permutations in different places.
Does this tie into that textbook, that Inua?
Inua.
Inua.
Yeah, Inua is kind of pretty broad, it probably has some of that information there. Yeah. But there are a few concepts that are basic to native cultures. One is animism. Everything has a spirit. A rock has a spirit. A stream has a spirit. A tree has a spirit. So rather than being Christian and you as an individual human have a spirit and nothing else does, everything has a spirit. So you have to be much more conscious of your actions. I pick up a rock and I put it back down where I got it. I don't even think about it. I think I don't want to disturb this world. I look at this rock. Yeah, it's nice, but put it right back where I found it. And I remember being told that there were old people who picked up rocks with an awareness that every rock had a spirit, and you couldn't be casual about even a rock. Or old people would find it objectionable if a little kid whacked on a tree with an axe, a hatchet. You say, if you don't need it, you don't whack on it with a hatchet. There's a spirit. The tree, it's a living thing. It's you don't just casually go and whack on it with an axe for no reason.
In art class, we were taught that when we're carving, any of the shavings are to be returned back to the woods.
Yeah, that's part of Athabascan practice.
Okay.
A man gets really good birch and makes snowshoes. He'll save the material and he'll put it in a safe place, like under a tree where it's not going to be walked on. And that's respecting the tree, and also he will be rewarded in being able to find more good wood to make his snowshoes and so on, because he's treating that tree with respect. So it's a tree that's treated with respect. But that's that whole thing about animism. Everything has a spirit. It's
And when you were talking about the tree and not hitting it with the axe, and you said something about not taking it if you don't need it, is that conservation idea of only taking what you need and leaving?
take what you need, but to take something that you don't need means that you're not treating it properly. You're not acknowledging it, that it has a spirit.
Okay.
You're just whacking on it because you want to whack on it. You don't have a use for it. You don't hunt when you don't need meat. You don't fish when you don't need fish. When you do fish, you catch the fish you need and you stop fishing. You don't want to take anything that you can't use. So like for my old people with that awareness, like my father, my grandfather, they didn't need any hunting regulations. They took what they needed and then that was it. They treated it properly. kept it clean. They used it, they spread it around. Hunting societies were very aware of the uneven harvesting through hunting. So there was a strong value that hunters shared. As there was an element of luck. I mean, people could be tremendously skilled and get nothing. Somebody else would get something, and then you share your take with other people. So you have to have this awareness, and the old people still value that. Old Athabascan people. Last fall I got a moose, and I had a hindquarter moose. I took it to the Doyon Elders luncheon, and packed this thing in there, put it over on the freezer, and the person in charge, a woman, all the old people had assembled to have lunch, and she got them to pay attention, and she said, pointed me out and said I had brought them a hindquarter of moose for their food, and they all got up and they all applauded, all these old people. God, it broke my heart, just to be, to see that that those people still were so keyed in and so appreciative. It's like being back in the village. One fall, I talked to a lady who had come in from one of the villages and was living here in Squarebanks, and I said, if I get a moose, would you like some moose ribs? Oh, she'd like some moose ribs. So I got this huge moose, and I got on the phone, I called her, I said, I got this big moose, he has fat ribs, and I know you would like some. I could bring you some. She started to cry, and I'm on the phone, and she's crying and crying and crying and crying, because it was like going back to her village and being a young person again and having people share the wild foods. So instead of being isolated in Squarebanks, she got to relive being a young person in the village, and she cried. I had to give up after a while.
Yeah, they were teaching us in class that no one goes hungry, that you give away.
Yeah, when early, stampeders, gold seekers came into the north, Native people helped them, provided food when they had no food. It was part of their cultural values. You share with people in need. Your first obligation is to be a competent person yourself. Hunting is the highest goal, to be an effective and knowledgeable hunter. And if you are, you share, you take care of your family, you take care of children, you take care of old people who can't hunt for themselves, and you take care of strangers in need. You don't disregard them because they're not your family or your village. Your obligations as a hunter are to reach out and help those people.
So your family has Athabascan history.
Yeah, my family are fur traders and Hudson's Bay Company people primarily.
Okay.
And, in fact, my Sir George Simpson, who was governor of the Hudson's Bay, was my family, George Simpson.
Okay.
So Thomas Simpson was a map maker on the Arctic coast of Alaska for the Hudson's Bay in the 1830s. And there was 200 miles of the Arctic coast that hadn't been mapped. So he came down the Mackenzie River and he coasted across to Barrow. And in the process, he went across the 200-mile span. And then he got his pencil out and put names on the prominent places like Prudhoe Bay, Colville River, Cape Simpson, Dease Inlet, and so on. So he was the map maker, so he got to do it. Put his names on it, but mostly political. Board of Governors of the Hudson's Bay got their name on some prominent feature. You got to caress the hand that feeds you.
Yes, for sure. In your background, did you have any other influence, like in your lifetime, to become an artist, like from either side of the family?
No.
No?
No, I was in the era of gold mining and truck driving. That was it. Now, you had two choices in life. You know, you could be a miner or you could be a truck driver. It was a kind of that's what everybody did. It was they passed the era when trapping was a big deal. Like when my father was a kid, trapping and gold mining were sort of your two choices in life. At my age, the world was starting to open up a little bit differently, but still, you know, I didn't consider art as anything except what strange people in short pants did somewhere far, far away. You know? Until, but I had a high school teacher in Whitehorse, Lilius Farley, who was a wonderful teacher, and so I took classes from her as part of going to school for a couple of years, and I did a piece of sculpture that went to a Western Canadian competition, and I was the award winner for the sculpture division. I thought, wow. So, you know, it had some meaning. High school, I went to a very British high school in Victoria. We didn't have any art. We played English rugby 8 hours a day or something, you know, no art. And but then I came to Fairbanks, and I registered as a geology major, and then I got wandering around the campus, and I walked into a class that was silversmithing, Ronson-Ungatuck. It was the first class, regular class that he taught. He had taught a summer class, and then when the fall came, he started this first class, and I came in a couple days late, you know, after registration, and I looked around and thought, Jesus, this looks really interesting. So I got a late sign-up permission, and I started taking the class. So I worked at geology, and then I went into changed my major to anthropology, and Ivor Scarland was my anthropology advisor. So he was a great old guy. I loved Ivor.
There's some history here.
Yeah, Ivor was such a nice man. He died in the 60s, maybe 62, something like that. He was on campus. He lived in a little shack, a little cabin up beyond the dorms, and he had a heart problem. It was New Year's. He wandered around his faculty house and that faculty house, had a couple shots of this and that, and it was colder than a rock out. It was one of those deadly nights. He made it halfway home. He had a stroke, hit the dirt, and I understood that he actually froze to death. He was just disabled. He hit the ground, and it was 47 below. A couple hours, he was a dead guy. I liked Ivor a lot. I cried like a little kid when I discovered that Ivor had died over the Christmas holidays. Such a nice man. But he was, I took anthro classes from him.
Okay.
I probably would have stayed in anthro forever if I'd gotten away from just the academic side, where you read the book, you write the exam, you read the book, there's no hands-on. Once I discovered art, I started staying up all night, working in metals. And finally I thought, Jesus, what am I doing? I'm staying up all night working metals, and I'm supposed to be an anthropology major. So Ronson-Ungatuck had gone to the School for American Craftsmen in Rochester, RIT in Rochester, New York. And so I thought, well, that's a recommendation. So I went there, and I stayed there for 4 years. I got my master's, MFA in metals. My major instructor was Hans Christensen, who was George Jensen's silversmith from Denmark. A very, very skilled silversmith. So that's what I did for quite some time, is work in metals.
Mhm.
My thesis work was hollowware, where you take metal and you work it into a container. That's the hollowware.
All right.
Forging,
Mhm.
working, and that's working with metal as a plastic material. You can, you see it's unyielding. You hit the hammer.
Yeah.
50 hours later, you have a container that's driven up out of sheet metal.
Mhm.
A challenge, kind of specialized knowledge,
Mhm.
and that's what I did my thesis work on. It's hollowware. And then when I finished the school, I got a job here on the campus immediately, and taught metalsmithing and jewelry. But rather than continue to be very much influenced by Danish modern, Scandinavian, teapots that look like they can go 200 miles an hour. Beautiful stuff, and tremendous technology, workmanship. I started to realize how much the native concepts meant to me, and I just sort of a continuation of anthropology. I kept seeking out knowledge and finding ways to include it, to use it as the basis for my work.
Okay. Is this some of the stuff that you brought?
I brought various things.
Okay.
In the central Yupik, there's a creature that's a river crocodile. Has 6 legs. They call him a palrayak. And so I was messing with technique, and I discovered how I could print copper or silver in this kind of reptilian-looking pattern, skin. So I thought, Jesus, that looks like some kind of reptile. But then we're not big on reptiles here in Square Banks. Oh yeah, in the Kuskokwim, part of their mythology is the palrayak. He's a 6-legged river crocodile, and he would attack Yupik people in the old days and eat them up. So the illustration sometimes would show he had 3 stomachs. They'd show the stomachs with hands and feet and little people parts throughout, because he'd attacked the people and eaten them. And all the umiaks before 1900 had silhouettes of the palrayak underneath, outside along the gunnels. So once I thought, oh, there's a crocodile skin.
Yeah.
So I printed material copper and colored it with a torch, oxidized it, cut it into the form of the palrayak, and then this is the palrayak skin. It's a genuine palrayak.
I can see it on there.
Yeah. And here's a genuine bent palrayak skin container, very much like the oval bentwood boxes.
Yes.
That's the
Yeah,
form.
the wood.
Bent around, overlap. Exotic wood bottom. The top is muskox horn, which is part of the mythology of the palrayak. When they find muskox skulls in the YK Delta, the people would attribute them to the palrayak. So it's really quite a nice material. So that's the genuine palrayak skin box right there.
Here you go. Is there anything else you wanted to share that you brought along with us?
There's a buckle in sterling, but it's the silver salmon buckle, which is
Look at
it's
that. Heavy duty. That
yeah,
is
it's
sterling?
the sterling, yeah.
And the eye, what is that made of?
That's gold, 14 karat gold. So the gold eye. I think he's very effective graphically. There's some ivory
Oh my goodness.
whale's tail.
Is this fossilized or
Well, it's mineral stained.
mineral stained?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's ivory from St. Lawrence Island.
Okay.
Uh,
And the chain is
the
this?
chain is classical gold chain.
Mhm.
I made my own alloy and rolled it and drew it to get the wire.
Mhm.
And this is fused classical chain. There's no soldering involved. You close the links by heating them to the point where they flow shut like a weld. So there's no solder involved. It's an ancient material,
Mhm.
fused classical chains. So this is 22 karat gold, and then the mineral stained walrus ivory, and then a pattern of the same gold piercing through.
Mhm.
It's a process called PK, which was done in 1892, that kind of era, where tortoiseshell often was decorated with PK of gold or silver wire, and then it's worked off so that it's flush, but you have this dot pattern.
Mhm.
Dot pattern around here. Old, mineral stained walrus ivory is so beautiful. It's just, it's the texture, the
Has-
colors.
Mhm.
The whale's tail was a captain's share for whalers, so I called it the captain's share.
Oh, that's lovely.
Nice piece. Little mysterious pieces. This was a piece I got from one of the St. Lawrence Islanders,
Mhm.
from Savunga, and it's walrus ivory. It's mineral stained from age, and it's stylized. It has kind of a flat back, rectangular legs. The head is small, features are small. His throat is cut out, which is the access for spirit
Mhm.
in a belief system. And so I had it for years, and I'd look at it. Why did they do this highly abstract piece? They could carve naturalistic things. They could do anything with ivory. They were tremendous ivory workers. And then I realized it's a typical old piece from St. Lawrence or Bering Straits, which has simultaneous imagery. It's simultaneously a bear and a bear's tooth. See the form?
I do.
Once you think, oh, Jesus, it's a tooth. Then I looked in references, and there are lots of teeth
Mhm.
that have legs. They're bears and bear's teeth. The teeth are the cutting edge, they're the power of the bear, the concentrated power of the bear, like the claw of a grizzly bear.
Mhm.
But this is bear and bear's tooth, and the cutout throat is an access for spirit. The spirit can enter. So a man who made this as his charm for hunting the polar bear is the power to hunt at sea. The cutout throat is access for spirit. This would be carried in his charm kit to help him to have some of the attributes of the bear as he hunts at sea. The hole is rectangular. Sometimes round is in Yupik it's called ansun, a passageway, and it would be in some instances it's a passageway between worlds.
Yes.
It's illustrated on the hooping of masks from the Waikiki Delta. The hooping is ansun, a passageway, so that is traveling. The form is traveling between worlds. Our world, the world of the dead, world under the sea, so on. And it's a very widespread reference to the belief of Yupik people, the passageway. Birth is entering this world through the passageway, which is the birth canal.
Right.
Leaving this world is traveling through a passageway to a different world. So you can enter and exit different worlds. But
That is fascinating.
the little guy he's Punuk, I believe. Punuk is, I think, something like 350 AD to 1700 AD or something. So he's probably at least a good 1500 years old.
Oh my goodness.
St. Lawrence had a lot of artifact material. The people go out there and mine it like it's gold nuggets, and then they sell the stuff, you know. And they own the island. You know, it's under the native claims. They own the island, so it's pretty hard to go out there and tell them, hey, you can't come up with this beautiful artifact and sell it because I don't want you to. You know, they say, geez, I can sell it. I can make $1,200 or whatever. Who's going to look the other way?
The museums are probably going crazy.
What the hell? Well, yeah.
We want to put that in our museum.
Yeah. Here's a piece that's very. I got the beads from Nunivak Island. These are white hearts, and then.
What's a white heart?
It's a red bead. The core is white.
Oh.
See.
Yes.
They're called white hearts.
Okay.
Trade beads, about 1830, white hearts came onto the market. Prior to that, green hearts were more common, and green interior. And then the little guy is from Brevik on Kotzebue Sound, and that's the loon. He's a loon swimming underwater. He's
in the swimming
He's on his
format,
way.
right?
And the loon is one of the ancient symbols of shamanic power because the loon lives in different worlds. He flies in the air, he walks on the earth, he swims under the water. And this is spiritual power, shamanic power. You can transfer between different worlds. You fly in the air, you walk on the earth, you swim under the water. So he's an ancient Asian symbol of spiritual power, shamanic power. So there are a number of animals like this. Here's the otter for the Tahltan Athabascan people that are related to. They call it Kazuna, and Kazuna is spiritual power. It's the same as the loon. It came over from Asia. The otter walks on the earth. He swims under the water. So if you get down in the southeast among the Tlingit, for example, the loon is, or the otter is very closely related to the shaman. Shaman's power. So this is a nice approach to it where the tail curls over, and that's the hanger. I got one of the.
That's fascinating.
I got one of the carvers, Pennisuk from Nome to carve a couple of these pieces for me where the tail rolls over, and that's the hanger.
That's clever.
Old ivory from St. Lawrence.
Keeps it strong.
Oh, I have one. Oh, this is a nice piece.
This also is Yupik. It's sometimes referred to as a shamanic hand, and for the people, it's a tongue hawk hand. Tongue hawk is a spirit that lives in the moon, and he controls animal life that comes back to the earth. So a shaman could go to the moon, negotiate with a tongue hawk to release animals back to the earth. So more seals, more walrus, more caribou, and so on. The tongue hawk is controlling the release of new life back to the earth. And to represent that, his hands are shown, especially as appendages on masks, as a hand with a hole pierced in the palm, and the thumb is tucked in as a vestigial, which means the grip is lessened. He's more likely to release life back to the earth. So it's a beautiful form.
Wow.
That's a tongue hawk hand. And then this is a trade bead from that area, one of the early trade beads probably came across from Asia. And then I have the upturned rim. I soldered gold on the rim, so there's a yellow line. and then the bead is in there on a cross piece, so the bead can be moved. It's not fixed. It can turn on its cross piece, and it's a wonderful symbol. The tomahawk hand. But if you look at old masks, Yupik masks from Central Yupik, from Waikiki Delta, the shamanic hand is a representation of shamanic power, dealing for the release of life back to earth.
Is this also a chain that you made?
No, this is a commercial chain.
Oh, it is, okay.
Yeah.
But you did the hand.
Yeah, I just buy it from a supplier. A grizzly bear claw.
Oh my goodness, look at this.
And a little bear's head, and
Oh yeah.
a trade bead, amber glass bead, probably Venetian. I found it in the site of an old trading post up on the Porcupine River, just in the ground. And so I set the claw, little bear's head, a bead from the area. The claw for native folk is, again, the power of the creature. You know, it's a concentrated power. For grizzly bears are considered to be male. They're big, rough guys with lots of muscles, and they're considered to be male power. So if you're among a Koyukon, for example, if an old-fashioned Koyukon woman was traveling on the river with her husband and she saw a grizzly bear, she has to respect that as maleness. She can't deal herself into it very much. So she would just say, I see a big animal, and her husband would know she sees a grizzly bear. Okay. But she, as a woman, has power that is the opposite of male power. Women have women power, which is the potential for life through childbirth, and men have the power of hunters, the power to take life. And those two powers are separated. They're strong powers, but they're specific to sex. Women's powers, men powers. I was reading recently Van Stone. I think he was saying that Athabascan women were considered to be sick when they were pregnant or giving childbirth, and I thought, bullshit. You know, that is what it is their power is not compatible with a hunter's power. So the powers of women and the powers of men are both powerful, but one can diminish the other. They have to keep some separation. So it's not what he thought it was, that it was some kind of concern, that there was like an illness. It's not. It's a power that is the opposite of male power, the power to give life. And in Point Hope, in old times, they said that everybody had charms that related to power, and there were just two sources: the power of life and the power of death. And that's like man, woman. Men as hunters, women as the givers of life.
Working in the university in the anthropology or ethnology and history, we noticed students, there's notations on boxes where women are not allowed to handle certain items in the archives.
Yeah. Manpower and woman power.
Okay.
Women can diminish the power of Athabascan women are not supposed to step over the rifle of a man. That's his hunting tool, his hunting power, and for a woman to step over it will diminish it. Maybe he won't be so accurate, he won't be so successful as a hunter if it's associated.
this big dagger that I brought. This is an early coastal Tlingit dagger in iron. So this was made in the 1700s, maybe 1775. Early pieces were often a source of iron before trade was debris that came in on the currents from Asia. A ship could wreck out, say, off Japan, would be swept across the North Pacific. Some of it would fetch up all the way from the Aleutians, all through Southeast, British Columbia, Washington, down to Mexico. And also some of it went through the Aleutians and went all the way to Barrow. Barrow is a point where east and west currents shear off from Barrow. On the west side of Barrow, there can be material from shipwrecks off Japan. On the east side of Barrow is material from the Canadian North, like the Mackenzie River, timber from Mackenzie River and so on. But that's the point where east-west currents come, shear off, and you find from materials from Asia, exotic trees, drift iron as part of wreck debris. So on the coast of Alaska, iron was salvaged, came in on the tides, currents, and so iron was there as salvage material, and that's acknowledged through their stories. Klukwan have a great story about one of their daggers for Tlingit. Their important pieces that belong to the clans received names, titles. So this dagger is titled Ghost of Courageous Adventurer. And the story is that a young man from Klukwan walked to the north, went into the Copper River Valley, went up and traded for native copper. And then on the way back, they decided they would go to the coast, to the mouth of the Copper River. So they went down there. In the process, they had to pass through mountain passes that were glaciated, and they lost 2 of their members into a crevasse. So 2 of their members died there. And then they traded for a piece of walrus ivory at the coast. Then they made their way back to Klukwan. And then before they got into Klukwan, they came on a large piece of iron and debris from Asia, an iron spike. So they salvaged a piece of iron. When they got back, they had these materials. They had ivory, they had copper, they had iron, and so they made Ghost of Courageous Adventurer, which is an iron dagger. The pommel is a human skull in walrus ivory, and the eyes are abalone, and the handle is overlaid with native copper. That it's an Asian style where the copper flashes out over the top of the blade. You see daggers like that in Japan, and then they wrap the handle. But it's a beautiful piece, and the title is to commemorate the 2 men they lost into a crevasse when they were traveling. Ghost of Courageous Adventurer. It is at University of Pennsylvania, the Museum of the University of Pennsylvania. I went there at one point, and I got Catherine McClellan, as an old northern anthropologist, a very highly respected person. She wrote them a letter that I was a VIP and they had to treat me right, or they would pay a heavy price, So I went there and they took me in and showed me around. So I got to pick up Ghost of Courageous Adventurer. Ooh, heart be still.
Was it heavy? Did it
No,
weigh a
not
lot?
particularly heavy, but just a beautiful piece, and the title is so wonderful. I think, wow, Ghost of Courageous Adventurer, heart be still. But this piece was found near the headwaters of the Yukon, near Carcross, about 1948. I think a hunter was out and he found it stuck into a pine tree, and he brought it back to the village, and it was purchased by an old friend of mine, Lilius Farley, who was my art teacher way back she had it, I would stop at her place and admire it and so on. When she died, she left it to me.
Oh, okay.
So this is from, this would be from the Carcross area, Tagish. I think the people would be called Tagish. The old Tagish spoke a Tahltan language. Tagish, Tahltan, and Kaska are all Tahltan languages. And nobody speaks Tagish anymore. The last speaker died 25 years ago. But this is from that area. And they have a museum in Carcross. I might, at some point, take the dagger back to the area. I'm big on that things from specific places go home, they go back to that area. Last summer I took some beautiful snowshoes, a couple pairs of them back to Teslin, and they go into the community museum. It's one of the fabulous things that one of their skilled people did, 30 years ago, or whatever it was. I got 2 pairs of snowshoes from him, and they were hunting shoes. Hunting shoes are extra long, extra big, so you strike out across virgin snow that has never been compacted. They're not trail shoes, they're hunting shoes, so extra large, and they allow you to strike out across soft snow and make your own trail. So the old Tom Smith made them for me, and they sat around my house for 35 years, and then last year I transported them back to Tesla and gave them to the local museum, which they were so happy to have it because he was a wonderful person and a tremendous craftsman. He made snowshoes that rival any snowshoes. They're just extremely nice.
Is this in part like decolonization? Are different museums trying to return artifacts to their native area?
There are various laws, especially things that are religious, have religious significance, or are grave goods. There's some laws about cultures reclaiming those materials. But I think just run-of-the-mill objects they go back if someone chooses to sell them or has the drive to return it to its origin. But Teslin was an isolated village like many villages until the Alaska Highway was built in the early 40s, I think 40, I don't know, was it 41 when they came through? Many of the workers were black men. And one of the little girls in the village said she went out and she watched these men building the road. Gosh, these men they have black skin. She'd never seen that. So she said she went back to her mother and she said, Mama, those men that are working out there, they have black hands, they have black faces, they're black all over. And this is typical of isolated people in those times, 1941. Mother said, don't you worry, honey. She said, they're just a different kind of white person. And that was how people were perceived in that time, that they're us, the inland Tlingit people, and then there are them, and everybody other than our own people were called white people. It's just generic for not us. And so white people included Chinese people and black people and the whole gamut of race. Those were all white people. So when I was a child, I knew an old lady who had come in during the gold rush, Klondike gold rush. And she came through Teslin, which is one of the routes to the Klondike. She and her husband, and at Teslin, her child was born, a girl. And so she named her girl Teslin. And she went on, and when I was a kid, I knew her. I knew her through the rest of her life. Mrs. Hunter, and Mrs. Hunter used to tell us about her journey to the Klondike. And she said, my child Teslin was the first white child born in this area. She's a very black lady, and her husband was a very black man. And yet, it was accurate because there's us, the inland Tlingit people of this village, and there are them, everybody else. So a very black person was a white person. And that was, Mrs. Hunter would tell us that when I was a child. My child, Teslin, was the first white child born in this country. So I think, and I didn't, I was a little tiny kid. I didn't differentiate this person, that person, Oh.
That's humorous.
Yeah. So I stopped. Teslin is where one of my great grannies came from, in the 1800s, and so I still have contacts in Teslin. I stop there, shoot the breeze with people. Every year, of course, there are fewer people to shoot the breeze with because we get tremendously old and drop dead. And so, all my friends. I had friends in Whitehorse that were kids that were my contemporaries, the family, the Steeles. I go through Whitehorse, have a cabin, and on down the highway a few hundred miles. And I was always ready, want to get down there. I won't stop now and visit the Steele boys. Got to get down there. And finally I said something to somebody. I said, "Oh, the Steele boys. Christ, they've been dead for 20 years. So that's the problem, You wait long enough, you don't know anybody anymore.
You outlive everybody else.
Yeah. And I stopped at Teslin one time. There was an old lady who was a friend of mine, and we had tea, which is typical. We make tea. It's kind of a social thing. Sit and drink the tea, and she said, "Do you believe in Indian religion?" I said, "As much as anybody's religion, I believe in it." "Sure." She said, "Well, I'll tell you this then." She said, "Last week, my older sister Maud died here. She's an old lady. She died in the village." And she said she was fading, and old people gathered around her. She died. And he said those people went out onto the edge of the lake, the beach, and they talked to each other. What are they going to do? Oh, they'll have a gathering in memory of Maud, and they won't. They'll be very careful about inviting young people so they don't get drinkers coming to the memorial, and they would do this and that. And then she said, up the lake appeared this natural phenomenon. There's a black cloud that appeared very dark in front of a mountain up the lake. It's called the Aces. In front of the Aces, this dense black cloud appeared. And then in front of the dense black cloud, an intense rainbow appeared. And then all the old people were standing on the beach looking up there. And I said, "Wow, it's Maud. Maud's out there. She's crossed over. Maud's sending us a message. She says, 'Don't be sad. I send you a message of beauty.'" So I thought, wow.
That's beautiful.
That's wonderful.
It is.
Maud was out there, and she was speaking to them. So that's the idea that the spirit
Lives on.
lives on. It's there. It may be close. In Maud's case, she was influencing the rainbow to inform that she was there and they should not be sad. So there's little glimpses like that. See, I was born in 1941, and that makes me extremely elderly. Well, in 1941, there were still lots of people around who came into the Klondike Gold Rush. There were lots of Native people who, were there before the Klondike Gold Rush, including members of my family. And so I could talk to somebody, and I would be talking to somebody who had never been to a Western school, maybe learned English as a second language, so on. So it was very direct, talking to people. I spent time with the Reverend David Salmon here. He was born on Fort Yukon, I think. He's from Chalkitsik. And his father and his grandfather and David between the three of them, they spanned 200 years of life. His grandfather was born on the Chandelar River around 1807, 1809, somewhere in there. And then his father was born in midlife to his grandfather. And then David was born in midlife to his father. David lived here in town until, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. And so I was privileged to spend some time with David. And because of the structure of his family and what happened to him through his life, he had knowledge that's lost, his cultural knowledge. Three men spanned 200 years. His grandfather, his father, and himself. And I think, wow, 200 years is a hell of a slug of years. But because of his unique upbringing, his father was afraid of the diseases that were common in the villages back when David was young. So he said they went into a remote place north of Eagle, across the Yukon River, north of the Yukon River, and they lived up there and trapped up there for years. And then they would come into a trading post once in a while for some things, but they essentially avoided villages, and they stayed healthy. But because of David's family heritage, he was exposed to things that other people weren't, things that had fallen away as society changed over culture. And one thing he did, he said as a child he was trained in archery. So he started out with a little bow, little arrows, and then as he grew, a bigger bow, bigger arrows. Then somewhere around maybe 18, he graduated to having an adult bow, and adult arrows, and then specialty arrows, fish arrows, bird arrows, hunting arrows. But from years and decades of archery, starting as a child, he learned it in like Zen archery. It's internalized. So he said there's a caribou, it's distant, it's running, the wind's blowing, he gets his arrow, knocks his arrow, and then he said, then I would think the arrow to the target, because he's not doing conscious, estimating distance, and it's all direct. He's an instant computer. He just picks it up. He thinks the arrow to the target, away it goes. So that was the unique upbringing that he had. That he had that archaic knowledge, and many other things too. I spent some. He made tools. He sold his tools, reproductions of old things. He sold them to Doyon. They're on display in their building in glass cases on the wall. And when Doyon thought of purchasing his material, nobody would volunteer to deal with him because he's such a powerful old guy culturally. So they asked me to do it. I said, "What? Me?" So anyway, I went down to Doyon and I met with David. He had his tools laid out. And then he figured, well, I'm making a decision, so he has to tell me about his tools. So then he talked to me about all these things. And of course there's nothing comparable that you can say, well, it's worth such and such. Value is related to other things that were marketed and brought in so much. So for me, it's just like, so I told Doyon, they should offer him $10,000. That makes sense to me. So they did, and he accepted it. His tools are on display in the Doyon building in glass cases.
For the public to see.
Yeah, you go in there and walk around and have a look at all these tools. Some of them are really quite wonderful. That kind of specific knowledge of how people hunted, and just a variety of things, tests of strength and different tools.
Did he craft these himself?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, from his memory and his knowledge, he worked with a local man here on campus who was anthropologist, and between the two of them, O'Brien, I can't think of his name at the minute, but he worked with David, and then they had a show at the museum called Tools from the Skin House Days, and then from there he would take them to various meetings and talk to people and talk to children and so on about these traditional things. And then before he died around, I think he was about 97, something like that, an old timer. The pieces actually then were purchased by Doyon, and he could go and borrow them if he wanted to use them for something. But they had a resting place there at Doyon, where they still are. Well, am I all talked out, or?
Well, after metalsmithing, did you go on to use other medium?
I always worked small, because I like the scale of these things. They're very personal. They're charms, and they have certain powers associated with them. And this sort of thing is very pleasing to me. Simple. I wrote quite a bit. I wrote a lot of poetry for a lot of years. Everything I wrote would fit. One poem would fit on one half of an index card. They never got any bigger than that, because I was looking for the essence, the heart, the meaning. And so my writing is, that's it, And I'm trying to project an image. So I'd write very carefully, crafting the words, the language, and the image. I did that for quite a while, and as I have always done, I pursued it for decades, and then at some point I thought, that was it. I never did it again. I think about it, and whatever was driving me isn't there anymore. A jade axe from Bering Straits. It would be from Kobuk River. The jade is quite tough. Jade is not particularly hard, but it has a fiber structure. It's very tough, so it's appropriate for an axe. This probably was hafted as an adze. I don't think they used an axe like this. And it's a beach find from Bering Straits. Alfred Olana found it on the beaches. And you see here where they cut it. They abraded it. So they used something to carry sand and then moisture, and they'd work it and then they'd drop it, and the shock would break. But that's actually abraded, worn through, and this was a naturally occurring edge of a piece of jade. But Alfred gave it to me in 1991. I was at Shishmaref. But it's a great piece. I think it might go back to a museum in Nome or some such, because it's a beautiful piece from that area. Here's something I'm returning to the museum at Teslin. In my awareness of security, I stuff things around the house. I'll put them over here and there. And then like 6 months will go by and I think, God damn, I've lost it. Somebody stole my such and such. And then I'll open the right cabinet and there it is. That's what happened just like yesterday. My wife got rooting around somewhere and came up with the beaver net rattles. And I wanted to get these back to the museum at Teslin because they came from Teslin. Moosehoof.
Oh.
And this is one of the old hunting aids. They would set a net under the ice like where the beaver came out and went into a slough. At Teslin, they said old men and one young strong man would get together in the spring. They'd go to where a beaver house was, and they'd set up in a slough close by. They put a net under the ice, cut holes, and string probably a rawhide net. And then they had one end would come out and go up to a stick, and on the stick were rattles.
Oh my goodness.
So then they'd build a little fire and they'd make tea and they'd tell lengthy stories, and then the rattles would sound. The beavers hit the net. Then the young strong man has to get up and run for the net, and he pulls it out with the beaver stuck in it, and then he smacks him with a club. And that was one of the methods of taking beaver. And that came from the coast, which is netting seals. Seal netting was done. Tlingit did it. Yupik did it, and Nupia did it, so on. Setting seal nets. And then it transposed, it evolved into netting beaver in the Yukon Territory.
Sharing knowledge. Did they use anything like this with the netting of the seals? Did they have an alarm system also?
I'm not sure. I wasn't aware of an alarm system. But seal netting, in fact, I have a seal net float. It's carved out of driftwood. It looks like a bird. And it's pierced on the end, and it was tied to the top line of the seal net. And the purpose of the float was to get the seal inquisitive, like, what the hell is that? He sees something, and he'll come in to investigate it, which I've experienced out at sea, where you're out there puttering around in your little boat. Geez, there's a seal over there. He goes in. The next thing you know, he's right there looking at you. He's curious. So the floats were to attract the seals. So the float that I have is a bird form, and then one of the forms of seal net floats in like in Nunavak, in that area, were what they call seal brethren, and they're sort of softly formed pieces that supposedly represent seals, and then they're joined with an ivory chain, and they're attached to the float line of the net, and then these pieces bob around so the seals can spot them and say, I wonder what that is. And then the ivory chains make a sound, and the ivory chains not only make a sound to attract the seals, but they are spiritual power, shamanic power. Iron chains were symbols of shamanic power in Asia. As they traveled and the influence hit the Bering Straits, the chains were done in ivory. They have the same meaning. They're as the iron chains. It's a priestly thing to make iron chain in, say, Japan in the 13th century. It was done by people who had spiritual powers. You're taking this tough stuff and you're making it into this material, into this chain. So Asian shamans wore iron chains stitched on their clothing. Siberian shaman wore iron chains. But when you hit Bering Straits, they mutated into ivory chains. If you go to Ibiutak at Point Hope, beautiful ivory chains, maybe an ivory chain, and then the finials will be the heads of loons, the spiritual power to travel between worlds, so on and so on. And that same influence carries to the seal nets. You have ivory chains not only making noise to attract the seals, but representing spiritual power. Well, the old guy's running down here. It's about running out of words.
Oh, well, it's been fascinating.
Yeah, well, I always worry, geez, I don't know what the hell I could say.
Oh.
But, it's like class. If I ever get started, there's no end to it. They have a long kind of shepherd's crook. They grab me around the back leg.
No, it's been really fascinating, and I like how your artwork is kind of woven into your life story. And
yeah, that's sort of the outgrowth of anthro, and also having family who are native people,
Mhm.
and knowing people who lived in pretty isolated worlds. You know, I spent time with Peter Kalifornsky
Mhm.
from Kenai, and I spent time with Howard Luke and a number of
Oh, my
people,
goodness.
you know, where I could
All right.
torque them a little bit and get some inside information.
Well, thank you for bringing all your stuff to
Yeah.
share.
Now, I'm much more comfortable having something, you know, rather
Sure.
than the words are they're not three-dimensional, you know, they're
One thing I might have you ask.
Mhm.
What's the importance of carrying this knowledge on?
Okay.
Something around that.
Okay.
Other than that, I think we're fine.
Okay. So you know how you were talking about the three men that covered the 200 years?
yeah.
And I don't know if anybody interviewed anyone in the family to carry on the knowledge, but I mean, what's your feeling about the importance of like our conversation here today and carrying on knowledge?
The thing about art is that it's always on the move.
Mhm.
You know, we're not living in the Northwest Coast. You know, I hear this stuff. Oh, that's not classical. It's not like they did it in 1875. I said, yeah, you're not living in 1875. You know, you're living now.
Mhm.
You have different technologies. You have different knowledge. You have different things, and yet you have this whole cultural heritage that you can build on.
Mhm.
So I don't like it when people think they have to do a sort of reproduction work. It's got to look like it did. It's classical because it's just like it was in 1870. You know, it's dull. You know, you want to do museum reproduction work, or do you want to do something that has some content?
Mhm.
Art, if art has any power, it's the content. So materials can change, but it's all being structured on cultural knowledge.
Mhm.
And then it has some strength. It's relevant. It's not a reproduction.
Mhm.
People tend to think they have to do some object like it was done in some classical period.
Sure.
The thing about Northwest Coast material is like 1875, the people were not doing what they did in 1840, and they have different tools, they have different demands and different ideas. It's not static,
Mhm.
but I do like drawing on cultural concepts and then creating the object with whatever you have. You know, if it
Mhm.
takes a different technology, and so what? What's valuable about the piece is that it has content. It has it's not that it looks exactly like it did in some classical period. That's the downside of, I think, of native art, is that people get into forgetting that art is expression, has a message, art has content, and they start thinking it's art when it looks like it did in 1875. I see. Not so.
Mhm.
So I don't get that hung up on materials, although I love certain local materials, you know, ivory, antler, hoof and stuff like that. I really like to use it, but I don't use it exactly like somebody else did 100 years ago. And yet I have cultural content.
Mhm. Oh, thank you.
And since you're a woman, you can't actually touch this thing
Okay.
because it will diminish your childbearing
Oh.
years by 10 years of touch. 10, 20 years, 30, like that, see?
Oh my goodness.
Because that's essentially male combat. And I had it in Teslin, showing it to older folks. And the women wouldn't touch it.
Okay.
Man stuff, they can't. They have to stand back. They can't touch it. It's the opposite of their. Or it's the other side of human power. It's manpower.
I find that fascinating.
Tlingit clans are very strong. If you want to summarize Tlingit culture, you say our wealth is our power. So clans had a conflict. They could settle their conflict by pitching one champion against another rather than having a whole group of people attack another big group to settle some differences. They would meet together and say, we pitch our champion against your champion, and that will resolve this issue. But then, because their wealth is their power, they could go and find a champion. If they didn't have Mr. Big and Ugly in their own clan, they could go very far away and hire somebody who's essentially, a strongman for hire. And that guy could come in from great distance away, a whole different culture, and he's 9 feet tall, and he has the world's biggest knife, and he has body armor, and he will fight for your clan for a price. So they're mercenaries.
Oh.
So that's part of this kind of thing. This is for combat. You fight the opponent. You try to stagger him with a club. They have a club, and the double dagger is Northern Tlingit. And try to stagger him, stick him with the big blade. If that doesn't work, if they grapple with the guy, then they can upend it and stick him with the little dagger. Try to get him off balance by mashing him with the club first. But in these contests where the clans are trying to settle an issue, they would specify what, and very often they specified a double dagger or a dagger, but sometimes a double dagger and a club. And their champion went after their champion, and their champion could come from 200 miles down the coast because
That was legal.
he's the guy for hire. Yeah.
Wow.
Your wealth is your power.
Okay.
You know? So that was part of Northwest Coast. There was these kinds of contests that were specified. Even in warfare, when one group attacked another, they might meet first and specify which weapons could be used. We can use only clubs, no knives. Nobody uses knives, and they would go with that because the stuff could be worked out by negotiation before anybody hit the deck.
And after the skirmish was over and one side won, what would happen?
Well, then their view of whatever issue it was, who owns this land, or who owns the rights to certain stories and blah blah, then they would prevail because they won, and the other side would have to eat crow because they lost.
All right.
But I think it was rather remarkable that people could arrange something like that where they didn't involve large numbers of people in a conflict. They would pitch our big guy against your big guy, winner take all, and they'd have roles would be negotiated. Whoever hit the ground first would lose. Whoever drew first blood, or in extreme cases, who was killed. Person could be mashed with a massive club and not come back because they have a permanent doink on their head.
Well, I think we did a good job of covering
Collective knowledge.
all areas.
The wisdom of the ages is passed to you. The flaming torch.
Yes. Yes, this is part of the Native Arts of Alaska, the Talking History program.
Yeah, the
Really valuable.
museum has a slate knife. It's in one of the displays. It was received from one of the Browers who said, this knife was used in combat, a big slate knife. But slate is weak shit, you know. It's
Yeah.
and
I'm surprised.
and so they asked me to examine it and write some kind of a little tag with it about what it was.
Mhm.
And I pointed out that the fact that the knife would break might have been part of its design, because that's a nasty wound when you break
Mhm.
the knife off within your opponent, and he's going around with a bunch of debris.
Sure.
It's not a nice clean wound, and that was done. I talked to one of the young men from Nelson Island, and he said he found an arrowhead that was either bone or ivory and had some deep score marks in it, made it look weak. And he took it to one of the elders. He said, "What is this? You know, this looks like it would fail, like it break."
Mhm.
He said, "That's designed to do that. That's an arrowhead that's used in warfare. You hit your opponent with that, it fractures, and you have 6 pieces within your body instead of 1. It's a fragmentation arrowhead. It was part of combat at Nelson Island. So people had devilish devices that, talking about warfare stirs up emotions and so on.
Sure.
It's hard to get any information, but there were weapons that were designed specifically to attack your enemy.
Mhm. Didn't realize they had that kind of.
Oh yeah, they like in the Delta. There are lots of legend stories of combat.
Mhm.
One of the stories in the Delta is that a group from over near the Yukon River went down south on the Delta and attacked another group down there. This was Ann Reardon was telling this story at Crossroads of the Continents at the Smithsonian in 1988. I was there listening to her. And this group attacked the other group, and they killed many of those people. They threw their bodies into a pond, and so many bodies went into the pond that it overflowed its banks, and water ran out over the land. And then people popped up their hands and said, "Why did they throw their bodies into the water?" And she said, "I don't know, you know, like that was
Mhm.
209 years ago. I don't know." And I knew. I said, because part of belief is that everything lives in its own place. We're creatures of the land. There are creatures of the water. There are creatures of the air. And that's your appropriate place. So if you kill somebody in hand-to-hand combat or whatever reason you went after them, you killed them,
Mhm.
you could put their body into water, then go into a foreign world, and their spirit is confused,
Mhm.
and then you can get back to your home village without being tracked and attacked or injured by the spirit of this person that you killed. So the reason they threw large numbers of bodies into a pond is they want to put them into a foreign world where they're confused. They don't know anything about anything because that's not their world, that's not their place.
Mhm.
And then you can pack up your gear and go back to your village without being pursued by the spirits of the people you killed. So that's pervasive, and you find that in Athabascan stories where people are killed and they're put into the water, submerged in a creek or a lake. Everything is, life, creatures of the earth, creatures of the sky, creatures of the land,
Mhm.
creatures of the water. Father Jete was a Jesuit priest down on the Yukon in Nulato. He was the Catholic priest in Nulato from 1898 to 1928.
Mhm.
And he recorded a lot of language and also lots of cultural knowledge. And he said the people would take birds like grouse or swans or ducks or something, hunters, they'd walk away from their campsite or their home,
Mhm.
and they would pluck the birds, and then they would throw the feathers into the air as they plucked the birds. You're returning the elements of the birds to their world, which is the world of the sky,
Okay.
the world of the air. So the man would be plucking and throwing the feathers into the air. Fish bones went back to the river
Mm-hmm.
because they're creatures of the water. Coastal, whale bones, seal bones went back to the water. Bird feathers went back to the air.
The belief system, can they trace it back to any particular place? Like, did our people adapt that from another culture? Can they-
Well, some of it is, walked across from Asia with people from the Asian side.
the shaman belief.
Yeah, a lot of beliefs are,
Mhm.
came across really fundamental things, but these are just outgrowths of belief systems that everything lives in its place.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it does come full circle. It's really fascinating.
Well, I should make those massive wheels roll.